Number 1. Robert Finley Smith. Robert Finley Smith had been to St. Stephen's Episcopal Church before. He'd sat through at least one previous potluck dinner there, alone at a table, not talking to anyone. Nobody knew who he was, and nobody asked too many questions. Of course, it was a church dinner, not a background check. So when he showed up again on the evening of June 16th, 2022, nobody thought much of it. The church had posted a public announcement on Facebook for a Boomers Potluck, a social dinner for older members of the congregation, running from 5 in the evening to 7. Around 25 people came that Thursday evening to the Parish Hall of St. Stephen's on Crosshaven Drive in Vestavia Hills. Smith, 70 years old, was among them. He sat alone again, distant, not eating. Walter Rainey, 84 years old, a longtime member of the church and by all accounts a genuinely warm man, noticed the stranger sitting by himself and walked over to invite him to join a table. Smith gave his name only as Mr. Smith and said he used to be a member. He turned down the invitation. Rainey's wife, Linda, noticed the man still had no food and offered to fix him a plate. He turned that down too. A few minutes later, Smith pulled out a concealed handgun and opened fire. Walter Rainey was shot first. He died at the scene, in his wife's arms. Sarah Yeager, 75, was also hit and rushed to UAB Hospital, where she died shortly after. A third victim, Jane Pounds, 84, was also shot and transported to the hospital. She died the following day. 3 people were dead, and the shooting had lasted long enough for only one person to do anything about it, a 79-year-old retired investigator named James Musgrove, who was also at the dinner. Musgrove picked up a banquet chair, held it in front of him like a shield, and ran straight at Smith. He grabbed Smith's gun hand, forced him to drop the weapon, retrieved it, and struck Smith with it until he went down. He and another church member held Smith on the ground until police arrived, around 6:22 that evening. Smith's booking photo showed a blackened left eye and cuts to his nose and forehead. Smith lived less than 3 miles from the church, on Sicard Hollow Road in Vestavia Hills. When investigators went to his home the next day with a search warrant, what they found added another layer to a case that was already hard to make sense of. Smith was a federally licensed firearms dealer. His home was the registered business address for a gun shop called Original Magazines 2, and his ATF license was valid through 2025. Court records painted a picture of a man with a long-running sense of grievance. In 2007 or 2008, Smith sued Samford University and a UAB police officer named Jeremy Birchfield, claiming he had been wrongfully detained on Samford's campus and falsely accused of impersonating a police officer. He argued the accusations had spread through the law enforcement community, which made up a large part of his customer base, and had damaged his business. He won a jury verdict of $29,000 in damages. Beyond that, his criminal record was limited to 2 DUI charges, one in 2005 in Chattanooga, one in 2016 in Alabama. Between 2019 and 2022, Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies responded to 13 calls at Smith's home. Most of those calls appear to have been made by Smith himself. Requests for extra patrols, complaints about suspicious persons, criminal mischief. No reports were generated in most of the incidents, and after the shooting, investigators still couldn't answer the most basic question: why? No motive was ever publicly disclosed, not during the arrest, not during the indictment by a Jefferson County grand jury in late July 2022, and not when Smith entered a guilty plea on May 2nd, 2023. A mental evaluation completed in February of that year found him capable of standing trial. The only sentencing options under Alabama law for capital murder involving 2 or more victims were life without parole or death. The families of all 3 victims were unanimous. They did not want the death penalty. They wanted a plea, and they wanted it over. District Attorney Danny Carr entered the plea before Judge Candace Pickett. Smith's defense attorney, Emery Anthony, said reaching a plea had taken time and that they were grateful the families and the state had been willing to consider life without parole. Carr said plainly that Smith would die in prison. No explanation was ever given in open court. No statement from Smith. No motive entered into the record. Number 2. Keith Thomas Kinnunen. On the morning of December 29th, 2019, around 240 people gathered inside the West Freeway Church of Christ in White Settlement, Texas. It was a Sunday service. Communion was being passed through the congregation, and everything about that morning looked completely ordinary, until a man sitting near the back stood up. He had come in wearing a long black wig, a fake beard, sunglasses, and a heavy, oversized coat. His name was Keith Thomas Kinnunen. He was 43 years old. And the moment he walked through those doors, the church's security team already knew something was off. Church elder John Robertson was stationed in the video room monitoring security cameras when Kinnunen arrived. Something about the man's appearance didn't sit right. Robertson had him pulled up on a dedicated camera feed and kept watching. The volunteer security team quietly began moving in his direction. But before any of them could reach him, Kinnunen stood up from his pew, appeared to say something to the man closest to him, and pulled a short-barreled shotgun from under his coat. He fired first at 67-year-old Richard White, a River Oaks resident and a volunteer member of the church's own armed security team who had just finished reading scripture minutes earlier. White had already drawn his weapon when Kinnunen shot him. Kinnunen then turned the gun on 64-year-old Anton Wallace, a church deacon and registered nurse who had been a member of the congregation since 2007. Both men were hit at close range. 6 seconds. That's how long the attack lasted before it was stopped. Jack Wilson, a 71-year-old former reserve deputy sheriff and the head of the church's volunteer security team, was standing at the rear of the building. With congregants rising from their seats in panic, Wilson held his fire and waited for a clear shot. When Kinnunen half-turned in his direction, Wilson fired once, a single round from a .357 caliber handgun, from a distance of 45 to 47 feet. The shot struck Kinnunen in the head. He was dead before anyone else could move. 5 or 6 other armed congregants had also drawn their weapons, but only Wilson fired. Both Richard White and Anton Wallace were rushed to hospital. Neither survived. Now investigators had to answer one question: who was Keith Thomas Kinnunen, and why did he walk into that church with a shotgun? What they found was a long, documented history of instability stretching back more than a decade and across multiple states. In 2008, he was arrested in River Oaks, Texas, on a felony aggravated assault charge involving a deadly weapon. That charge was later reduced to a misdemeanor, and he was convicted and sentenced to 90 days in jail. In 2011, he was arrested in Tuttle, Oklahoma, after allegedly assaulting a convenience store employee and setting fire to objects around town, including tree branches soaked in gasoline and a football doused in lamp oil. In 2012, arson charges followed in Grady County, Oklahoma. In 2013, an Oklahoma court formally found him mentally incompetent to stand trial and ordered a psychiatric evaluation by the state's Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. That same year, an ex-wife filed a protective order against him. In 2016, he was arrested in Linden, New Jersey for unlawful possession of a weapon after being found taking photographs outside an oil refinery. By the time of the shooting, the FBI described Kinnunen as relatively transient, a man with roots in the area but no stable home, bouncing between the homes of friends in the white settlement region. His sister Amy confirmed he had been living that way. He had been married twice, both marriages ending in separation and estrangement. His second ex-wife, Angela Holloway, told reporters he had a serious drug habit and had lost touch with reality in the years before the attack. "We knew he was crazy, but not like this," she said. The FBI investigated but never publicly issued a definitive motive. What reporting did reveal was this: Kinnunen had visited the West Freeway Church of Christ multiple times before the shooting. Senior minister Britt Farmer confirmed the church had given him food on several occasions, but when Kinnunen asked for cash and was refused, he became angry. According to Farmer, it was a pattern. The church would help him with food, and he would get upset that they wouldn't hand over money. Number 3. Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof walked into Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in downtown Charleston, South Carolina, on the evening of June 17, 2015, and asked for Reverend Clementa Pinckney by name. The people inside welcomed him, handed him a Bible and a study sheet, and let him sit down among them. He was 21 years old, a 9th grade dropout with no job and no criminal history significant enough to raise a flag. To everyone in that room, he was just a young man who had come to church on a Wednesday night. Mother Emanuel, as the church is known, is one of the oldest black churches in the United States. It was founded in 1816 and for 2 centuries it had been a cornerstone of African American history and community in South Carolina. Roof had not chosen it by chance. He had researched it specifically, and according to court filings, he selected it because of its historical significance, because he believed that attacking it would have the maximum societal impact. That planning had started months before the shooting. In February of 2015, Roof registered a website under his own name called The Last Rhodesian. On that site, he posted a roughly 2,000-word manifesto laying out his racial ideology, along with approximately 60 photographs of himself posing with a handgun and a Confederate battle flag, visiting former plantations and slave cemeteries in the Carolinas, and burning an American flag. In those writings, Roof stated that he became what he called racially aware after searching the internet following the 2012 killing of Trayvon Martin. He went down a path of white nationalist websites and forums, and federal prosecutors would later conclude he was entirely self-radicalized. He also compiled a written list of churches he had considered targeting, along with a document he called a selection of victims. By the time he walked into Mother Emanuel that June evening, he had already purchased his weapon, a .45 caliber handgun, using birthday money from his family. When Roof entered the church that evening, he sat down next to Reverend Pinckney, the senior pastor and a sitting South Carolina state senator, and he stayed there, sitting in the Bible study, for the better part of an hour. He had walked in, carrying 8 loaded magazines, each holding 11 hollow point rounds, for a total of 88 bullets. When the group bowed their heads to close the session in prayer, Roof stood up and opened fire. He shot through the room repeatedly. 9 people were killed: Reverend Clementa Pinckney, Cynthia Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, Tywanza Sanders, Reverend Daniel Simmons, Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton, and Reverend Myra Thompson. Susie Jackson was 87 years old. Tywanza Sanders was the youngest victim and her grandnephew. One of the survivors, Felicia Sanders, later testified that Roof stood over her during the shooting. He looked at her and told her directly that he was leaving her alive to tell the story. Around 9:05 that evening, Charleston police began receiving calls of a shooting at Mother Emanuel. Roof had already left the building. He got into his car and drove north out of South Carolina. Security camera footage from inside the church identified him clearly, and after his father and uncle saw media coverage and recognized him, they contacted police. By the morning of June 18th, less than 14 hours after the shooting, Roof was stopped and taken into custody in Shelby, North Carolina, roughly 245 miles from Charleston. That same day, he confessed. He told investigators his goal had been to start a race war. He also reportedly told them that he had almost not gone through with the attack because the people in that Bible study had been so kind to him. The federal case against Roof was substantial. A grand jury indicted him on 33 federal charges, including hate crimes and obstruction of religious exercise. Jury selection for the federal trial started in late September 2016. On December 15th of that year, the jury convicted him on all 33 counts. During the sentencing phase, Roof fired his own defense team, represented himself, called no witnesses, and presented no evidence on his behalf. On January 10th, 2017, the jury unanimously recommended death. The following day, District Judge Richard Gergel formally sentenced Roof to death on 18 capital counts, making him the first person in United States history to receive the federal death penalty for a hate crime. On April 10th, 2017, to avoid a second death penalty trial in state court, Roof pleaded guilty to 9 counts of murder and related charges at the state level. He was sentenced to 9 consecutive terms of life in prison without parole. In August 2021, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously upheld both his federal conviction and death sentence. In 2022, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear his appeal, ending his direct legal challenge. Roof is currently on federal death row at USP Terre Haute in Indiana. At his sentencing, he addressed the court and said, "I would like to make it crystal clear. I do not regret what I did." Number 4. Devin Patrick Kelly. On the morning of November 5th, 2017, Devin Patrick Kelly pulled into a gas station in Sutherland Springs, Texas, in a white Ford Explorer. He was 26 years old, and he was dressed for war. Black tactical clothing, a ballistic vest, a skull-patterned face mask, and a Ruger AR-556 semi-automatic rifle. Around 11:20 that morning, he stepped out of the vehicle, crossed the street, and opened fire on the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs before he even walked through the door. He killed 2 people outside. Then he went in. Inside, a regular Sunday service was underway. When Kelly entered through a side door and moved into the sanctuary, he walked up and down the center aisle, firing into the pews on both sides. According to investigators, he fired approximately 450 rounds over the course of an estimated 11 minutes, reloading 15 30-round magazines as he moved through the room. He killed 23 people inside the church. Combined with those killed outside and 1 victim who died in transit to hospital, the final death toll was 26. 22 more were wounded. The youngest victim was 17 months old. The oldest was 77. At least a dozen of the dead were children. It was the deadliest mass shooting in Texas history and the deadliest attack on a place of worship in United States history at the time. To understand how Devin Kelly ended up in that church, we have to go back several years and to a failure that was not his alone. Kelly grew up in New Braunfels, Texas, about 35 miles from Sutherland Springs. He had a troubled school record, 7 suspensions by high school, and graduated in 2009 near the bottom of his class. That same year, he enlisted in the United States Air Force and was assigned to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. His time in the military quickly deteriorated. Between 2011 and 2012, he repeatedly assaulted his first wife and her infant son, his stepson. According to retired Air Force Chief Prosecutor Colonel Don Christensen, Kelly physically assaulted the baby on multiple occasions, eventually fracturing the child's skull and causing a severe hematoma. He was brought before a general court-martial, the military's most serious level of criminal proceedings, and pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 12 months confinement, reduced to the lowest enlisted rank, and discharged from the Air Force in 2014 with a bad conduct discharge. Under both Texas state law and federal law, that conviction made it illegal for him to ever own or purchase a firearm again. The Air Force was legally required to submit that conviction to the FBI's National Criminal Information Center database. They did not. The Holloman Air Force Base Office of Special Investigations never entered the record. The Department of Defense would later acknowledge that the Air Force failed at least 6 times to report information that should have flagged Kelly as prohibited from purchasing weapons. So when Kelly walked into an Academy Sports and Outdoors in San Antonio in April 2016 and tried to buy a Ruger AR-556, his background check came back clean. By the time of the church attack, he had purchased 4 weapons from licensed dealers over a 4-year period. Every single one passed a background check. He had also applied for a Texas license to carry a firearm and had been denied by the state, but that denial did not prevent him from buying guns through retail channels. In the years after his military discharge, Kelly's behavior continued to deteriorate. He was cited for animal cruelty in Colorado after witnesses saw him beat and throw a dog. A week before the attack, Kelly posted a photo of a semi-automatic rifle to Facebook. The connection to Sutherland Springs was personal. Kelly's mother-in-law attended the First Baptist Church there. So did his grandmother-in-law, Lula White, who regularly volunteered at the church. Investigators confirmed that in the days and on the morning of the attack, Kelly had been sending his mother-in-law threatening text messages. Fortunately, his mother-in-law was not inside the church when he arrived that morning. As Kelly was leaving the church after the shooting, a neighbor named Stephen Williford was already outside waiting for him. Williford had heard the gunfire from his home nearby, and his daughter had alerted him. He grabbed his own AR-15 rifle, loaded it, and ran to the scene barefoot. He took cover behind a pickup truck across the street, and when Kelly emerged from the church, the two exchanged fire. Williford shot Kelly twice, once in the leg and once in the upper left torso, in a gap in his tactical vest. Kelly dropped his rifle and got back into his vehicle. Williford flagged down a passing motorist named Johnny Langendorf, jumped in, and the two pursued Kelly north on Farm to Market Road 539 at speeds up to 95 miles per hour, relaying information to law enforcement by phone as they drove. During the chase, Kelly called his wife and his parents. He told them he had just shot up the church, that he was injured, and that he did not think he would survive. He reportedly kept saying he was sorry. He then lost control of the Ford Explorer, crossed a ditch, and came to rest about 30 feet into a field off the road. When police arrived, he was motionless inside the vehicle. He had 3 gunshot wounds, including a self-inflicted wound to the head. 2 additional handguns were recovered in the car. The investigation that followed confirmed what the Air Force had already admitted publicly. Kelly never should have been allowed anywhere near a firearm. The weapons he used to kill 26 people were purchased legally through stores that followed the required process because the government agency that prosecuted him had simply never filed the paperwork. In 2021, after a bench trial in federal court, U.S. District Judge Xavier Rodriguez ruled that the federal government was 60% liable for the shooting, with Kelly bearing the remaining 40%. In February 2022, the Air Force was ordered to pay more than $230 million to the 80 claimants, relatives of the dead, and survivors of the attack. Number 5. Matthew Murray. In 2002, Matthew Murray was removed from a missionary training program at the Youth with a Mission Center in Arvada, Colorado, just days before he was supposed to leave on a mission trip to Bosnia. Program directors told him the decision came down to concerns about his health. Murray believed he had been rejected for being too introverted. He never went back, and he never got over it. 5 years later, that rejection ended with 4 people dead across 2 locations in a single day. Matthew was raised in a deeply religious Christian household in suburban Englewood, Colorado. He was the son of a prominent neurologist and had been homeschooled from 1st grade all the way through graduation using a strictly religious curriculum. His daily routine growing up included hours of Bible memorization, hymn singing, and prayer. He had almost no exposure to the outside world. By the time he enrolled at Youth with a Mission in 2002, he was painfully shy, struggling to socialize, and exhibiting what his former roommate described as extreme mood swings. At a Christmas celebration that year, Murray got up and performed Marilyn Manson and Linkin Park songs instead of the Christmas material everyone else played. Several students were unsettled. YWAM staff contacted his parents, and shortly after, he was told he wouldn't be completing the program or going on the mission trip. It was the first real community he had ever tried to join, and they sent him home. What followed over the next 5 years was a slow, documented deterioration. Murray drifted through community college, briefly enrolled at Colorado Christian University before dropping out immediately, and eventually withdrew almost entirely into online spaces. He had no criminal record. To anyone looking from the outside, he was just a quiet young man going nowhere. But online, under the screen name Nightmare Child 26, he was posting increasingly violent and hateful content on forums for people who had left evangelical Christianity. His post described what he called a lifetime of psychological abuse at the hands of his parents and church leaders, a hatred of Christianity that was expanding with each passing month, and a growing obsession with mass shootings. Investigators found downloaded material on Columbine, Virginia Tech, and the Platte Canyon school shooting on his computer. His room contained books on witchcraft, Satanism, practical homicide, and tactical shooting. In the 18 months before the attack, Murray legally purchased 5 firearms from licensed dealers across Colorado: a .22 caliber handgun, a 9mm, an AK-47 semi-automatic variant, a .40 caliber handgun, and a Bushmaster XM15 rifle, which he modified to fire a larger caliber round. He accumulated more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Every background check came back clean. He had nothing on his record to stop any of it. 2 days before the attack, on December 7th, Murray wrote his manifesto post and scheduled it to go live at 10:03 in the morning on December 9th, timed to publish after his first attack but before his second. The post stated he felt no remorse and no shame, and that he wanted to kill and injure as many Christians as possible. On the evening of December 8th, Murray's mother saw him at home around 6 o'clock. He told her he was going out with friends and not to fix him dinner. She later told police he seemed to be in good spirits. He drove to Arvada, and just after midnight on December 9th, he knocked on the door of the YWAM dormitory, the same facility that had turned him away 5 years earlier. He told staff he was a former member and asked to stay the night. They spoke with him briefly and told him he could not stay. Within 30 minutes, Murray pulled out his 9mm and opened fire. He killed Tiffany Johnson, 26, the center's director of hospitality, and Philip Krause, a staff member. He wounded 2 others and walked back out into the night. After the shooting, Murray drove home and went to bed. The next morning, his mother saw him heading out and assumed he was going to church. At 10:03, his pre-scheduled manifesto post went live. Then he got in his car and drove 70 miles south to Colorado Springs. New Life Church was one of the largest churches in Colorado with around 10,000 members. YWAM had a satellite office right there on the campus, and Murray's mom had always said the church's founding pastor was her favorite preacher. The family had donated money to the church and attended a conference there years before any of this happened. Around 1 o'clock that afternoon, about 30 minutes after the morning service had wrapped up, Murray pulled onto the New Life campus with the Bushmaster rifle, 2 handguns, a backpack full of ammunition, and smoke bombs. He set the smoke bombs off near 2 entrances and opened fire in the parking lot. He shot and killed Stephanie Works, 18, and her 16-year-old sister Rachel as they were walking to their car with their father. Their father, David, threw himself between Murray and his daughters and was shot twice. Murray wounded a woman in the shoulder in the parking lot, then walked into the building's main foyer and shot another man who had deliberately stepped forward trying to draw his attention away from everyone else. By this point, the church's security team was already moving in. One of them was Jeannie Assam, a former Minneapolis Police Department officer who volunteered on the security team. When she heard the shooting outside, she moved toward it instead of away from it, and she found Murray in the hallway and opened fire with her personally owned Beretta 9mm, shooting him 10 times and striking him in both the femoral and carotid arteries. Murray fell, and then fired a single shot into his own head. The El Paso County coroner confirmed after autopsy that the self-inflicted gunshot wound was the cause of death. Senior pastor Brady Boyd said Murray never got more than 50 feet inside the building, and that Assam had probably saved over 100 lives. Murray had arrived with more than 1,000 rounds. He fired 42 total, 15 at YWAM, 26 at New Life, and 1 final shot at himself. In his car after the attack, police found a handwritten letter addressed to God. Written sometime after the first shooting and before the second, the letter asked what Murray had done wrong, questioned whether he was a bad person, cursed God, and ended with the words, "Am I too lost to be saved? I wish I knew the truth." Number 6. Emmanuel Kidega Sampson. The note was already in the car when Emmanuel Kidega Sampson pulled into the parking lot of Burnett Chapel Church of Christ in Antioch, Tennessee, on the morning of September 24, 2017. He'd written it beforehand and left it on the seat of his blue Nissan Xterram, a handwritten message that named Dylan Roof, the white supremacist who had walked into a black church in Charleston 2 years earlier and murdered 9 people. Sampson's note said that 10 white people would die in retaliation. The number was deliberate, 1 more than Roof's body count. The note ended with a smiley face. Sampson was 25 years old, born in Khartoum, Sudan, and had come to the United States as a child in 1996. He grew up in Tennessee, graduated from Smyrna High School in 2010, and had attended Burnett Chapel itself as a congregant a year or 2 before the shooting. People there remembered him. A church member named Minerva Rosa had worked with him at Vacation Bible School. The minister, Joey Spann, knew him by name. That morning, around 50 parishioners were wrapping up their Sunday service. Unaware that one of their former members had arrived in the parking lot wearing a neoprene half-face mask with a clown smile printed on it and a tactical vest, carrying 2 handguns and leaving an AR-15 rifle staged in his vehicle. Melanie Crow was the first person he encountered. She was 38 years old, a mother of 2 from Smyrna, and she had just walked out of the service heading to her car to get a cough drop. Her daughter had waved goodbye to her from the window that morning. Sampson shot Melanie once in the face. As she tried to run, he shot her 3 more times in the back, hitting her heart, liver, rib, and kidney. She died in the parking lot. Sampson then walked to the rear entrance of the church and went inside. He moved down the aisles and opened fire. He shot the minister, Joey Spann, and his wife Peggy. He shot 4 other congregation members, the oldest 83, the youngest 64. Minerva Rosa, a nurse who was present, called 911 while the shooting was still happening, watching Sampson fire from the aisle. None of the 6 people inside the church died, but the attack didn't end because Sampson chose to stop. It ended because a 22-year-old church usher named Robert Caleb Engel decided to stop him. Engel went at Sampson not once but twice. Sampson pistol whipped him 3 times across the head, But during the struggle, Engel managed to shove the gun back toward Sampson. It went off, and the bullet hit Sampson in the chest. He went down. Engel's father, who was also in the church, kicked the gun out of reach, stood on Sampson's hand, and told his son to go get his own weapon from the truck. Engel ran out, grabbed his personal Ruger SR-45, came back, and stood over Sampson with the gun pointed at him until police showed up just after 11:15 that morning. The picture of who Sampson was in the months leading up to that Sunday is hard to ignore. In January of 2017, police responded to a domestic dispute at his home in Murfreesboro. He'd punched a television during an argument with his girlfriend. Then in late June, his father, Venancio Sampson, called Murfreesboro police after his son sent a text in the middle of the night saying he had a gun to his head. Police located Emmanuel at a Nashville security office, dressed in professional clothes, and he told them he was fine. No further action was taken. Venancio went back to police and asked them to take his son's guns. He said he was scared. Police told him they couldn't, that it was his son's civil right to own them. Venancio testified at trial that he also urged his son to use the Bible and prayer to deal with the demons that terrorized him at night. On the morning of the shooting, Sampson left what his girlfriend believed was a suicide note and sent a goodbye video to a cousin. Around 10 in the morning, he emailed the security company he'd been working shifts for, thanking them and saying he wouldn't be coming back. His last Facebook post, around 10:26, roughly 30 minutes before arriving at the church, read, "Everything you've ever doubted or made to believe as false is real." Investigators found the handwritten note in his SUV, along with the AR-15 rifle he never got to use. The note referenced Dylan Roof by name, invoked the red, black, and green Pan-African flag, and stated that the blood of 10 white people would be shed as vengeance. Prosecutors at trial said the number 10 was intentional, one more than the 9 Roof had killed. A review of his Facebook account also revealed sympathies toward black nationalist groups, including the New Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam. Sampson's trial began in May 2019 in Davidson County Criminal Court in Nashville, with Judge Cheryl Blackburn presiding. He pleaded not guilty despite having admitted to police that he'd arrived at the church armed and opened fire. His defense argued he was suicidal that morning and that his actions were the result of severe mental illness. A psychiatrist testified that Sampson had been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. His defense attorney pointed out that he had stepped over wounded victims inside the church without stopping to finish them off, arguing that a man truly intent on killing 10 people wouldn't have done that. Prosecutors played jail calls recorded a month after the shooting. In one of them, Sampson and his then-girlfriend laughed about the attack, and he asked her, "So I was looking that good? Was I on flow?" Those calls, along with the note, the staged weapons, the goodbye communications, and the specific target number, were central to the prosecution's case that this was premeditated racial retaliation, not a suicidal episode. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. They found Sampson guilty on all 43 counts, including first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 7. Terry Michael Ratzman. At some point between February 26th and March 12th, 2005, Terry Ratzman walked into a hardware store near his home in New Berlin, Wisconsin, and told the clerk he was angry at his church. He said the Sheraton Hotel was going to be on the news. Nobody called the police. Nobody flagged it. And 2 weeks later, he went back to that hotel and killed 7 people. Ratzman was 44 years old and had lived in the same modest house his entire life, sharing it with his mother and his adult sister. He'd grown up in New Berlin, served 4 years in the U.S. Coast Guard in the late 70s and early 80s, got his honorable discharge, and spent the decades after that working contract computer technician jobs placed through a staffing firm called Adecco. His most recent assignment was at GE Healthcare's offices in Waukesha County, and that contract was winding down. He raised trout in his basement, grew carnivorous plants, shared vegetables from his garden with neighbors, and went to church every single Saturday. That church was the Living Church of God, a small denomination based in Charlotte, North Carolina, that had splintered off from the Worldwide Church of God in 1998. The Brookfield congregation had no building of its own, so they met every week in a conference room at the Sheraton Milwaukee Brookfield Hotel. Around 50 to 60 people attended regularly, and Ratzman was one of them. He'd been part of Armstrong-affiliated churches his whole life. He knew these people. They knew him. Then came February 26th. The sermon that day was a recorded one called "Two Trees, Two Houses," played on video for the congregation. It made the argument that people's problems are of their own making. On top of that, the church's leader had been writing in their magazine that a financial collapse was coming, that a colossal financial iceberg was heading for America. For a man already watching his job contract run out, that combination apparently hit different. Ratzmann stood up partway through, walked out before he was even scheduled to give the closing prayer, and didn't come back. That was the last service he attended before the shooting. In the 2 weeks that followed, he went to work and kept his usual routines. He tried calling a former pastor in New Mexico, but never got through. And somewhere in there, he walked into a hardware store and told the clerk the Sheraton was going to be on the news. On March 12th, he showed up early to the 12:30 service, took a look inside, and left without going in. He drove home to New Berlin, changed his clothes, and came back. When he walked into that conference room, the service was already about 20 minutes in. He had a 9mm Beretta on him and 3 magazines of ammunition. He moved to the back of the room and stood there facing the backs of more than 60 people who had no idea he was behind them. He didn't say a word. He opened fire toward the front of the room first, where Minister Randy Gregory, 51, was sitting with his family, then kept shooting. The attack lasted roughly a minute. A witness said shots came every 2 seconds or so. He emptied his first magazine of 13 rounds, dropped it, reloaded, and kept going. 6 of the 7 people who died were shot in the back. A delivery truck driver named Gerald Miller, 44, threw himself over a 66-year-old woman named Dorothy Hodzinski when she hit the floor. He took a bullet to the chest and another to the arm shielding her, and died from his wounds. Hodzinski survived. The 7 people killed were Randy Gregory, the minister, his 16-year-old son James, Harold Diekmeyer, 74, Richard Reeves, 58, Gloria Cretari, 55, Gerald Miller, 44, and Bart Oliver, 15. 4 others were wounded, including Gregory's wife Marjan, who was critically injured. During the rampage, a longtime friend of Ratzmann's in the congregation screamed at him by name to stop. According to Waukesha County District Attorney Paul Bucher, Ratzmann responded and said he was upset, but didn't say over what. Then he shot himself, once in the right temple. When police arrived, he was slumped against the back wall of the conference room. Number 8. Larry Gene Ashbrook. Before Larry Gene Ashbrook drove to Wedgwood Baptist Church on the evening of September 15, 1999, he spent the afternoon destroying the house he'd lived in his entire life. He tore the family Bible apart page by page. He cut family members out of photographs. He used a shovel to stab through large family portraits. He bashed holes in the walls with a crowbar and filled the toilets with concrete. He went out back and poisoned the fruit trees. Then, according to investigators, he tidied up the yard and left. Ashbrook was 47 years old, chronically unemployed, and had never married. He'd grown up in Fort Worth, spent some time working for the Navy in Jacksonville, Florida, then came back to Texas around 1994 and moved into the same wood frame house where his parents had lived for 40 years. His father Jack was a deeply religious man who tithed regularly to his church in Arlington. Larry, by accounts from people who knew him as a child, had resented being taken to church 3 times a week. That resentment never went away. It just got buried under everything else that was going wrong. His mother died in 1990. People who knew him said that's when things started to shift, when the erratic behavior began. He became increasingly paranoid over the years that followed, convinced that police suspected him in a series of murders he had nothing to do with, that the CIA was watching him, that co-workers had assaulted him, and authorities had drugged him. He'd been trying to get someone to tell his story since the 1970s. Nobody listened. In July of '99, his father died at age 85. 11 days later, Ashbrook sent his first letter to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, describing bizarre encounters with strangers and his belief that he was being framed for serial murder. He sent more letters and made calls to local newspapers through August, telling one reporter, "I want someone to tell my story. No one will listen to me. No one will believe me." The editor who met with him in person just days before the shooting said Ashbrook seemed perfectly pleasant, easy to talk to. Nothing about him raised any alarm. That Wednesday evening, Wedgwood Baptist Church on Whitman Avenue was hosting a See You at the Pole rally, a nationally organized event where students gathered to pray, followed by a concert from a Christian rock group. Around 150 mostly teenage kids were inside watching the band perform. Ashbrook showed up around 6:45, walking in through the south entrance in mirrored sunglasses with a cigarette in his mouth. A seminary student named Jeff Laster, 34, who worked as a church custodian, went over to ask him to put it out. Ashbrook shot him in the left side and arm and kept moving. Inside the foyer, the children's choir director, Sydney Browning, 36, was sitting on a couch. She was shot and killed. Ashbrook pushed into the sanctuary. The teenagers in the room heard the noise, and most of them thought it was some kind of elaborate skit that was a common enough format at youth events. Two of them picked up cameras and started filming what they assumed was a performance. Ashbrook opened fire on both of them. One, 17-year-old Justin Ray, was killed. Both cameras went down. He moved through the sanctuary pacing and firing, shouting anti-Baptist obscenities at the congregation. He rolled a homemade pipe bomb down one of the aisles. It detonated upward into the ceiling, releasing shrapnel but killing no one. He reloaded multiple times. By the time it was over, 3 empty magazines were on the floor, and he still had 6 full ones left in his pockets. During the rampage, a 19-year-old named Jeremiah Neitz, a former high school football lineman visiting from another church, stayed in his seat and confronted Ashbrook directly as he approached. According to Neitz's account, which a Fort Worth police detective who interviewed him afterward described as credible and brave, the two exchanged words about religion. Ashbrook shouted that their faith was garbage. Shortly after, he walked to the very last pew at the back of the sanctuary, sat down, and shot himself in the head. The attack had lasted less than 10 minutes. 7 people were dead, 4 of them teenagers, the youngest 14 years old. 7 more were wounded. When investigators got to Ashbrook's home, they found the full picture of what he'd left behind. Walls with crowbar holes, concrete-filled toilets, poisoned trees, boxes of ammunition on the floor next to torn photographs, journals going back a decade, full of paranoid entries cataloging perceived plots against him. The 2 handguns he used had been legally purchased at a flea market the previous February, on the 13th and the 15th, from 2 different sellers. No background check flagged anything. No suicide note was ever found. No clear motive was ever established. Police confirmed there was no known connection between Ashbrook and Wedgwood Baptist Church or any of the people inside it. Number 9. Jim David Adkisson. Jim David Adkisson was 58 years old, unemployed, and living alone in a rented house in Powell, Tennessee, when he decided he was going to walk into a church and kill as many people as he could. He wasn't mentally unhinged in a way that left him confused about what he was doing. A 4-page letter found in his SUV after the shooting spelled out exactly who he blamed, exactly why he chose that building, and exactly what he hoped would happen when it was over. Adkisson had served in the U.S. Army from 1974 to 1977, including time with the 101st Airborne Division, though he was demoted from specialist to private before his discharge. After that, he drifted through jobs, eventually settling into work as a truck driver. He'd been married multiple times, at least 4, possibly 5, though accounts differ on the exact number. His last marriage ended badly enough that his then-wife obtained a protective order against him in March of 2000, stating in her court petition that he drank heavily every day, made threats, and had told a friend of hers that one of his options was to shoot her and then himself. She said she was in fear for her life. By 2008, Adkisson had been out of work for 2 years, his last known employment having been in 2006. He'd received a letter from the state telling him his food stamps were about to be reduced or eliminated. Neighbors described him as a quiet loner who rarely had visitors and never had anyone over. The church he chose, the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church on Kingston Pike in Knoxville, was known for its progressive social positions. It had advocated for gay rights and women's rights, provided sanctuary for political refugees, and helped found a local chapter of the ACLU. In his letter, Adkisson called it a den of un-American vipers and the fountainhead, the veritable wellspring of anti-American organizations. He stated that because he couldn't get to the actual leaders of the liberal movement, he would target the people who had voted them into power. He described what he was about to do as a hate crime, a political protest, and a symbolic killing. Near the end of the letter, he wrote, "If life ain't worth living anymore, don't just kill yourself. Do something for your country before you go. Go kill liberals." He fully expected to be shot and killed by responding police. It was, in his framing, a suicide mission with a body count attached. About a month before the attack, Adkisson bought a 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun from a pawn shop. On the morning of Sunday, July 27, 2008, he loaded it into a guitar case, packed a waist satchel with 76 shotgun shells, and drove the roughly 20 minutes from his house in Powell to the church on Kingston Pike. That morning, the congregation wasn't holding a regular service. The church's music director, Vicky Masters, had spent the summer running a theater workshop with the church's children, and this was the culminating performance. About 200 people were packed into the sanctuary to watch 25 kids perform. Adkisson arrived and first tried a door that led directly to the children's classrooms. It was locked. A female church member, not recognizing him as a threat, waved him around to another entrance. He walked past the area backstage where children were lined up waiting to go on and pushed through into the main sanctuary. It was around 10:18 in the morning. He pulled the shotgun out of the guitar case and fired. The first blast was loud enough that several people in the audience thought it was part of the show. Church member Mark Harmon, seated in the front row, said he heard an incredibly loud bang and assumed it was a sound effect. Then he heard a second shot and saw a woman bleeding and dove for cover. The first person Adkisson encountered as he entered was Greg McKendry, 60 years old, a longtime church member who was serving as an usher that morning. McKendry stepped in front of the shooter to shield the people behind him and took the blast directly. He was killed at the scene. Adkisson continued firing into the pews. He directed his shots at adults, not at the children. Police later stated there was an indication he was not targeting the kids, though that was never conclusively confirmed. Audience members dove under pews and behind a piano. Children fled backstage. A witness described a young girl covered in blood, standing just 2 or 3 feet from where Adkisson had opened fire. Linda Krager, 61, a retired English professor and member of the Westside Unitarian Universalist Church in nearby Farragut, had come to the church specifically to see the children's performance. She was shot during the rampage and transported to the hospital, where she died that night. Adkisson fired 3 rounds total. He had 73 shells left when 5 people in that room physically stopped him. John Bostead and Robert Birdwell, both church members, forced him face-first to the floor. Arthur Bolds and Terry Uselton helped hold him down. A visitor named Jamie Parkey, who had crawled under the pews with his daughter and mother when the shooting started, jumped up when he saw men rushing the shooter. He said that by the time he got there, they were already wrestling Adkisson and the gun was in the air. Someone grabbed the weapon. Parkey applied a police suppression hold and sat on Adkisson until police arrived. They bound him with belts and whatever else people could find. The whole attack lasted only a matter of minutes. 2 people were dead. 6 more had been shot and survived. A 7th was injured diving for cover. Among those hospitalized in serious condition were Jack Barnhart, 69, and Linda Chavez, 41. No children were among the casualties. Investigators executed a search warrant on Adkisson's house in Powell the same day. Inside, they found a .38 caliber handgun, a sawed-off shotgun barrel, and several books by conservative political commentators. They also found the letter from the state government telling him his food stamps were being cut. The 4-page manifesto was recovered from his SUV in the church parking lot. Adkisson, interviewed by investigators on the day of the arrest, admitted to the shooting without hesitation and stated clearly that all liberals should be killed because they were ruining the country. On February 9, 2009, Adkisson stood before Knox County Criminal Court Judge Mary Beth Leibowitz and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and 6 counts of attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As of today, Adkisson remains at the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee, serving his sentence with no possibility of release. Number 10. David Fidel Mora Rojas. David Fidel Mora Rojas had been living inside the church in Sacramento for nearly a year. On the evening of February 28, 2022, he walked upstairs inside that church and shot his 3 daughters and their chaperone to death. He was 39 years old, out on bail from an arrest made less than a week earlier, with an active restraining order against him, and carrying a homemade, unregistered weapon that investigators could never trace. The story goes back to April of 2021. when associates from the church contacted authorities because Mora Rojas had told them he wanted to harm himself and his girlfriend. He was taken into custody that day for a mental health evaluation. 9 days later, a temporary restraining order was granted against him. His girlfriend and the mother of his 3 daughters had reached out to the Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center in crisis, and a case manager and attorney helped her secure the order. On May 19, 2021, a 5-year restraining order was formally imposed. Under its terms, Mora Rojas was only allowed supervised visits with his daughters, up to 4 hours per week, with a mutually agreed-upon chaperone. He was also required to take anger management courses. The order explicitly barred him from possessing a firearm or ammunition. From the time of that April mental health hold, he had been living at the church. The 3 girls were Samia, 13, Samantha, 10, and Samara, 9. They attended schools in the Natomas Unified School District in northwestern Sacramento. The man designated as the chaperone for their court-ordered visits was Nathaniel Kong, 59, a longtime church executive who had personally served Mora Rojas with the May restraining order. 5 days before the shooting, on February 22, 2022, Mora Rojas was arrested in Merced County, south of Sacramento. According to a California Highway Patrol report, he had been speeding before driving off the road and getting stuck in a muddy field near Los Banos. When officers arrived, he was clearly under the influence. He fought the arresting officer, punched him, and later assaulted a hospital worker while being evaluated. He was booked into the Merced County Jail on 5 charges, including felony battery on a peace officer with injury and driving under the influence. He was released on bail. No notification was sent to immigration authorities, which would later become a significant point of public controversy, as Mora Rojas had entered the United States from Mexico in December 2018 on a visa and had overstayed it, making him in the country illegally. The Merced County Sheriff later stated publicly that California's sanctuary state law prevented his office from notifying federal immigration officials about the arrest. On the evening of February 28th, the girls were at the church for a scheduled supervised visit with their father. Their mother was out of town. Just after 5 in the afternoon, a church worker heard a gunshot from upstairs, then more shots. They left the building and called 911. The call came in at 5:07. When deputies arrived, they found all 5 people dead. Mora Rojas had shot his 3 daughters and Nathaniel Kong, and then turned the gun on himself. All 5 were pronounced dead at the scene. 17 shell casings were found inside the church. The weapon was a ghost gun, a homemade, unregistered AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle with an illegal 30-round extended magazine. Because it had no serial number and no purchase record, investigators had no way to determine where or when Mora Rojas obtained it. The girl's mother was traveling when the shooting happened and was on her way back to Sacramento, as authorities were still processing the scene. Nathaniel Kong, the man who died alongside the girls, had served Mora Rojas with the very restraining order designed to protect them. The church later renamed its fellowship hall in his memory. There was no trial, no sentencing. David Fidel Mora Rojas died at the scene. The attack was the 70th mass shooting in the United States in 2022, a year that was barely 2 months old. These cases show that church shootings rarely come out of nowhere. In almost every one of them, there were warning signs, red flags that were reported and then forgotten. If you want more verified true crime investigations like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps the channel bring you interesting cases every week.